Good afternoon and welcome to the Middle East Forum's podcast series, Israel Insider with Ashley Perry. I'm Stacey Roman and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, join us this week to update us on the events going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will be giving us a briefing on the current situation in Israel for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and good evening from Israel. Lots to get through tonight. Starting with the title of this webinar is about the Rafah operation, or when is the IDF going to go into the southernmost area of Gaza, Rafah, which buttresses Egypt. This really is the last bastion of Hamas holdout. This is also where 1,200,000 plus Palestinians have been relocated to as Israel's worked its way from north to south throughout the Operation Iron Swords. What we have heard in the last week or so, as Israel has started to face further south from Khan Yunis, which is clearing up at the moment of Hamas brigades, is that a lot of international actors have been warning Israel against going to Rafah because of what they describe as a potential humanitarian disaster. And many saying that Israel simply shouldn't go to Rafah. The American position is more nuanced. It says that we will sort of trust or accept that Israel should go to Rafah when it is able to deal with the internally displaced Gazans there. And Israel's trying to come up with some sort of plan, and it ostensibly has, to deal with those that are internally displaced. But at the moment, it's still cleaning up in Khan Yunis. There have been some solitary attacks in Rafah, if it believes that there are Hamas senior people that it needs to pick off. But at the moment, the only real practical information coming out of the Israeli government on Rafah is that I think it was Gallant, Defense Minister Gallant, that said if there is no hostage deal by Ramadan, which is about 2.5 weeks away, it's on around the 10th of March, if I'm not much mistaken. That is the holiest month of the year for Muslims. It's a month of fasting, etc. And it's a good opportunity pretty much to have, if they're going to have a pause, that would be a good opportunity. A lot of commentators have said that that's probably good for Hamas and probably good for Israel. But so Israel is not going in probably full scale in the next few days, even the next couple of weeks. It seems like it is going to give time for some sort of hostage deal, which would involve some sort of, on the Israeli side, temporary ceasefire. Obviously, Hamas and its supporters want something more permanent, but it's clear that Israel, the operation into Rafah, is certainly not imminent. The big question that Israelis have been asking this week is, where is Sinwar? The Hamas leader, according to some sources, in fact, I think it was in some international publication, I can't remember which one, maybe Wall Street Journal, that was quoting Saudi sources who were apparently quoting Israeli sources that said that there's a good chance Sinwar is no longer in the Gaza Strip and perhaps took one of the tunnels into Egypt or some other route, but that's what was suggested. Israel denied that that is what their thinking is. And after speaking with some people in the defense establishment, there is a feeling that Sinwar will be in Gaza. He'll not want to be shown outside Gaza. Already, he's losing support within Gaza, and there is a feeling that he wants to remain there. And if necessary, that's where he's going to have his final standoff. That's, I think, more in line with what Israeli thinking is, that he and some of the other senior Hamas leaders remain in Gaza, probably in some tunnels. Israel is certainly putting pressure on him, releasing a video that it found of him in the tunnels with his family, living relatively okay. I wouldn't say in the height of luxury, but certainly doing far better than hundreds of thousands of Gazans above ground. So there is a lot of pressure on him from within Gaza. There are more and more demonstrations against him, against Hamas from within Gaza in the north or in the south and in different pockets of areas. As far as the hostage potential deal itself, at first Israel did not send a delegation to Cairo, which is where Hamas leaders like Ismail Haniyeh are now situated, along with Qatari interlocutors, Americans, and obviously Egyptian intelligence officials. What it does seem is that Hamas' maximalist position has been walked back in the last few days, and there is some start of optimism in Israel, because originally, as we know, Hamas's maximalist demands were for an absolute ceasefire, many mass murderers released from Israeli prisons, etc. Really, really very, very difficult demands, and what Netanyahu basically pushed away as completely unrealistic. And even the Americans understood that they're really unrealistic. But what appears to be happening is some sort of momentum in the last few hours. There is talk of a Paris 2 meeting. If we remember, the last Paris meeting was between Israeli officials, Americans, Qataris, and Egyptians that tried to hammer out some sort of structural framework for negotiations. These were turned down by Hamas outright, as I said, and they returned with their maximalist demands. But the fact that there's talk about maybe a second meeting in Paris of the same figures on Friday means that there obviously is some movement. Israel understands that it has to be flexible, but it's certainly not going to agree to what Hamas put on the table up until now. Also back on Gaza, interestingly, Defense Minister Gallant made some very interesting comments today where he talked about victory, as many other leaders have throughout this war, but he said victory helps integration. That may seem remarkable or strange to those who are listening to what people in the region are saying, leaders in the region are saying, what news reports are showing in the region and around the world. But actually, what Israel is hearing from many in the region is that it needs to win this war, and it needs to win this war well, because Hamas is part of what's known as in Iran as the resistant axis, and many in the region understand that Hamas, even though it's a Sunni organization, is very much part of the Iranian axis, whether it's Hezbollah, Shiite terrorist groups in Iraq or Syria, the Houthis in Yemen. And if Israel does not finish the job, it will embolden a lot of the extremists in the region, and especially Iran. And that obviously will be at the detriment to the pragmatic Sunni nations. And quite frankly, the reason that Israel has become relatively integrated in the region the last couple of years through the Abraham Accords and with this move towards normalization with Saudi Arabia is because Israel has shown itself to be a strong horse in the region, and that's something that has been looked upon by these pragmatic Sunni nations, and it has to be depended upon to strike or at least side with these nations against Iran. If Israel is not able to defeat its sort of pretty much weakest enemy at this point, if you look at Hamas in relation to Hezbollah or to Iran itself, it's certainly far, far weaker. So if Israel is not able to win this war, maybe there'll be a recalibration by some of the Sunni nations and start moving back towards Iran, or at least hedging its bets and removing a lot of what it's built up over the last couple of years, integrating it in Israel into the region. So Gallant was basically enunciating what a lot of Israeli officials are hearing. It is something which you won't hear on your TV screens, you won't see from world leaders, but it's something very much noted in Israel. And I mentioned in the past that the war against Hamas that Israel is waging at the moment is very much being paid attention to, not just by foe, but also by friend. Interestingly, in the last few hours, the Knesset passed a law, a relatively declarative law, but something that is certainly being described as a win for Prime Minister Netanyahu. What we've heard in the last few weeks is a lot of moves, potential moves by nations around the world to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. And even the US, there's been whispers and murmurs that that may be part of a package that they're going to present and perhaps even force on Israel in the coming weeks or months. Netanyahu basically came out against this. He came out forcefully against a Palestinian state, but has now walked those comments back a little bit. And what I mean by that is he's not necessarily said that he accepts a Palestinian state, but what he has done is tried to make it more palatable to a wider spectrum within the Knesset by saying that we are against a unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state, and actually put that into a law that passed in the Knesset by an almost, I don't know if it's unprecedented, but certainly in recent memory, 99 members out of 120. It was only the Arab parties who voted against. Labour basically didn't turn up for the vote, and I think that's pretty much everybody. So you see wall-to-wall support against a unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. Interestingly, in the wording was that an agreement, they didn't talk about Palestinian state, but an agreement can only be as a result of negotiations between the parties. Interestingly, in Hebrew, Netanyahu didn't talk about that part, but he did, from the Knesset plenum, add that part in and even put that into the declaration he put out in English. Opposition leader Yair Lapid mocked Netanyahu for saying, it's interesting you said this in English, where a lot of your coalition members who may have found it very problematic to talk about negotiated resolution to the conflict with the Palestinians. He was referring to the likes of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, whose grasp of English is certainly not the same as Netanyahu, and the fact that he mentioned those elements in English and not in Hebrew is certainly very telling. On US potential recognition, unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state, there has been a sort of lowering of that. There was a lot of trial balloons obviously sent out. This is part probably of a diplomatic push to try and get Israel to the table, to try and also soften the base. As I've said before, a lot of what is happening in the US can be seen through the prism of upcoming elections. So a lot of talk about Palestinian state, unilateral recognition, some sort of process involving normalization with other nations in the region. At this point in time, especially as Israel's in Gaza, wishful thinking. Perhaps the day after there can be some sort of process, but it seems that there's no real meaningful process at this point for the US to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. Another interesting element that came up this week, and I heard from some senior figures in Israel, is the possibility we may be going to national elections. Now, my particular feeling is that's extremely premature, but a lot see an issue which has been raising its head in the last few days as a potential political grenade intentionally thrown into the coalition, and that is the whole issue of the integration or enlistment of the ultra-Orthodox into the army. Obviously, that's been an issue on the radar of Israeli politics for decades, but there's been no real, genuine majoritarian political will for such a move. But in the middle of the war in Gaza, when we see people come from almost every single sector of Israeli society, some giving up their lives, becoming injured, etc., and there's one community that's it's very recognizable by its absence, and that's the ultra-Orthodox community. Figures came out today that 66,000 ultra-Orthodox men received deferment this year. That's a massive number. So all this talk of ultra-Orthodox enlistment has gone up since the beginning of the war. We're talking about no more than a couple of hundred maximum. So that's a real drop in the ocean. But what has definitely brought this to the fore, and as I said, is being read by some as an intentional diplomatic grenade, is the fact that during this war and over the last week or so, there is a draft law being put up that will extend the service of Israelis who enter the army. It will add, I think it's 4 to 6 months for the average male recruit. It will add, I think, even a couple of weeks to annual service to Miluim. And one can imagine that the outrage of that happening in the middle of a war, when there are 66,000 people from one community that were given a complete deferment and not basically coming to serve. So there has been a lot of pushback on that. There are some who feel that this could be an issue that could really bring the government to the brink, because there are members of the Likud who find this very problematic. And we've heard noises from within Likud very openly who are very angry about this and said we can no longer have a situation where everyone goes off to war except one community. Most remarkably, today we had Finance Minister Betzalel Smotrich of the National Religious Party, or the Religious Zionist Party, who usually sides with the ultra-Orthodox on many issues on religion and state, saying that this situation of the ultra-Orthodox no longer enlisting has to end. And that is a major statement by someone who is probably one of the closest people, politically at least, to the ultra-Orthodox community, but outside it as well. My feeling is part of it is to do with municipal elections, which are coming up next week. Israel will hold municipal elections. It was already put off for a few months, but it's finally going to hold them, at least in places where it can. And the National Religious Party, or the Religious Zionist Party, has to differentiate itself from the ultra-Orthodox Party in many electoral battle zones that they're fighting up and down the country. But it does seem that there is a great movement and a great paradigm shifting moment here, where a lot of leaders are saying that this is enough. We've understood, especially at the beginning of this war, with what happened on October 7th and fighting on two fronts or even multiple fronts, that Israel needs to have a larger army than rather extend the life service of soldiers, of people who do annual service every year. It's remarkable that that this community simply does not serve. So there's a lot of anger about it. It does seem that voices against this situation are coming to the fore. The government legal advisor said that the government has to deal with this issue once and for all by April 1st, because it's an issue that's just been put off. And legally, the Supreme Court has ruled on many occasions that the government has to rule on this issue. It's unconstitutional that one community serves, or many communities serve, and one community doesn't serve. It's been ruled unconstitutional, and they keep on asking the government to deal with it, and the government keeps on putting off another 6 months, another 6 months. And the government legal advisor today has come out and said that this has to be dealt with by April 1st. So that could really be a major problem for this government. We'll have to wait and see exactly. As I said, there is some feeling that perhaps this could be the beginning of the end for the government. But on the other hand, there are those who feel that going to elections in the middle of a war could give a great triumph, a great victory for the likes of Sinwar and Nasrallah, who could, if this happens, could claim to fell a government, and that would certainly give them a significant victory. So I'm happy to answer any questions on any of these issues.
All right, thank you so much. So the first question is from Carrie Hillebrand asking, why didn't Gantz, Lipid, Eisenkot et al. Support the parliamentary effort to remove Kasif from the Knesset?
Right. So I think we talked about this last week. Kasif is a member of the Joint List, is a member of the Communist Party, which is ostensibly an Arab party with one Jewish member, and that's Ofer Kasif, who is virulently, I wouldn't say anti-Israel necessarily, because he's an Israeli MK, but certainly a very problematic member of Knesset, who signed on the South Africa petition at the ICJ that Israel's committing genocide, and as a result, Oded Four of the Yisrael Beitenu party tried to garner the necessary 90 votes to start the process of throwing him out of the Knesset. In the end, they only achieved 85 votes, which meant that the process was halted and Kasif can remain in the Knesset. And there were certain voices who either voted against or didn't turn up. And some of those that you mentioned, Lapid and Gantz, It's unclear exactly why they didn't vote for it. They have their excuse that they felt that this wasn't the appropriate process that would anyway be thrown out by the Supreme Court. So it was more of a show than anything else. They said that there were other ways to try and get him out. But I spoke to other people today that said that their alternative process is not realistic. So it was more of an excuse. Perhaps they just wanted to show the international community that they didn't want to undertake such a process at such a sensitive time. It's not clear, as I said, but the process at this point has been halted as a result of the lack of these extra 5 votes.
Thank you. David Levine asked, do you have a reaction to Prince William's weighing in advocating a ceasefire in Gaza, in the Gaza war?
I mean, I did see the declaration. It's a bit more nuanced than calling for a direct ceasefire. And it also does obviously call for the immediate release of the hostages. But again, it's declarative. It's Prince William. He's not even a head of state at this point. So it's not something really remarked upon too much in Israel. There are those who like to see the positive, as I said, that it didn't call for an immediate ceasefire, unconditional, that some did, and it did call for the release of the hostages. So some saw it a little bit more nuanced than that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Rochelle Mand asks, can you address the camps Egypt is erecting at the border?
Well, it's not clear, and Egypt certainly haven't mentioned it. Egypt's in a very difficult situation, and apparently there's been demonstrations against Egyptian embassies in the region and in Europe, basically very unhappy about their position that they are walling in, Gaza from their side. They're not taking in their fellow Arabs, their fellow Muslims. Many in the international community don't really understand why. Their excuse is, has always been, that they feel that if any Gazans are, get out of Gaza, then they won't be able to return, that Israel will not allow them to return. It's a bit of an excuse. They don't want Palestinians in Egypt. They don't want them. They think they're going to stay there. They'd find them very problematic. So they are erecting not just an extremely secure border. I mean, you have to really see it to believe it. If Israel did something like that, you can imagine the international reaction. But there is also, I've seen some videos and some pictures of this so-called camp that they're building just beyond. Probably, if that is what as it's been described, it's probably a sort of last gasp attempt to contain the situation, that they may be forced over the border into Egypt, but they will not be allowed to just walk into the Sinai, walk into Egypt proper. They're building this so-called camp to make sure that they bring them out of harm's way, but not into Egypt proper. So probably that's what it is. It's if everything goes wrong, that's their sort of last gasp attempt to handle the situation.
Understood. Thank you. Eric Silkov would like to know, why do you think the IDF has not gone into Rafah yet? Because the longer they wait, the more opposition the world would have towards Israel, and the more time Hamas would have to prepare their defenses.
Well, I think it's mostly the Americans. The Americans have said that they want to see the plan. And for them, more importantly than the military operation in Rafah itself, is what they're going to do with these 1,200,000 internally displaced from the north and from the center. Israel's been pushing further south and telling the Palestinians to evacuate out of harm's way. Again, something unprecedented in the annals of warfare. But now they're all sitting in Rafah. And the Americans and others are saying, okay, we're not saying you can't go to Rafah, because we understand that's where maybe your hostages are. Certainly that's where the last few Hamas battalions are. But we want to make sure that the internally displaced Palestinians are put out of harm's way. So what are you going to do with them? We want to see some sort of plan for that. So I think Israel's giving itself a bit of time to come up with that plan, to get it at least greenlit, or at least not objected to by the Americans and others. And then it will go into Rafah, because it has to. It simply can't stop, 75% or 80% of the job done. I think it just wants to come up with a plan that that there'll be some level of buy-in by its friends around the world that will make sure there isn't some sort of humanitarian disaster.
Thank you. Barack Korkmaz would like to know, do you expect any spillover in Israel throughout Ramadan, especially in the mixed cities?
Where probably more than that, there is a lot of concern is on the Temple Mount. In previous years, the Temple Mount has been largely closed to non-Muslim visitors during Ramadan because of the sensitivity of the situation. There's already talk by Internal Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who actually wants to disbar Israeli Arabs from going to the Temple Mount. And already that's caused quite a lot of consternation within the cabinet. There was a feeling that Netanyahu had to side with Ben-Gvir at one point, but now it seems like that's being walked back a little bit because of, let's say, the more centrist members of the cabinet, Gantz and Isaac and others. So that's probably the biggest flashpoint, what's going to happen on the Temple Mount, because we've seen in previous years in Ramadan, emotions are higher, tempers are frayed, and we see that usually can have a spillover into other areas. We haven't seen throughout this war really too much in the mixed cities, too many disturbances like we did in the last operation. There are many different analyses of why that is. Perhaps because October 7th, they targeted Muslims as much as any others, and there were Bedouins who were killed and other Arabs. Perhaps because they understand that Israel is going to have a zero tolerance policy. And also probably because of what happened in the last operation, there was a lot more planning, preparation, not necessarily for October 7th, as I said, that took everyone by surprise, but certainly since the last round where there were major disturbances and riots and even pogroms that were described, there has been an upping of the presence of police, and perhaps that's also quietened down the situation there as well. But there's probably a lot of different factors. But at the moment, we haven't seen it. Can Ramadan flare up emotions? It's possible, but at the moment, we're seeing pretty quiet in these mixed cities.
That's good to hear for the moment. Merdad Kansari asks, how do you assess the possibility of serious escalation with Hezbollah, bearing in mind that any serious degradation of Hezbollah is tantamount to the collapse of Iran's regional policies?
What we have seen, interestingly, is Israel's taken a step forward and been targeting Hezbollah assets or Iranian assets around the country. Hezbollah certainly testing Israel, but certainly not going beyond, the northern border with its attacks. As we know, it has capability of much more. Interestingly enough, there were reports earlier that said that Hezbollah have basically are a big part of why Hamas have relented a little bit on their position over the hostage deal or the ceasefire or the temporary ceasefire, whatever it may be, because they simply don't want to get in a war. And they've promised that as long as there is fighting on the southern front, they will continue fighting. They need to keep up this image that they are keeping the IDF busy and away from the southern front. Obviously, we know that that's incorrect, but that's the image they have to perpetuate in the Arab world. But it's clear Hezbollah do not want a confrontation at this point. And they are trying to get Hamas to the negotiating table, because if there's a pause in the fighting in the south, as happened in the first pause, there'll be a pause in the fighting in the north. And Hezbollah have certainly suffered some pretty big blows over the last few months. So it's unclear exactly how this situation will resolve itself. Israel is still giving diplomacy a chance, even though it seems that at the moment nothing is really moving there, and all they're talking about is tried and tested and failed ideas, like even a watered down version of Security Council Resolution 1701, which meant that there should be no forces, basically referring to Hezbollah, south of the Litani River. So at the moment, there's no real negotiations between the parties, directly or indirectly, but it does seem that Hezbollah are suffering, and they are quite interested in at least some sort of pause, if not some sort of ceasefire that would allow them to step back from the brink themselves.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We do have quite a few other questions that were fantastic, but we did not have time for today. We have come to the close of our podcast. Ashley, thank you again for taking time to update us this week.
Thank you.
Of course, for our viewers and listeners, please join us Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern for a webinar with Greg Roman discussing moving Israel towards victory. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.